Hi, my name's Catherine Sutton and this is a video for BoBunny using their beautiful Butterfly Kisses paper range. I'm starting off with some of the sheets that I want to use, and as my base layer I'm going to use the petals paper and I'm going to use the wood grain side of it, and then I also want some of the brown wood grain which is on the reverse of the flutter paper. So I start off by marking with a pencil where I'm going to tear. I'm going to tear the top left and bottom right hand corners. So I'm just marking here roughly where my tear is going to go for the two 6x4 cards I've cut. Now I'm tearing carefully so that I'm going to reveal the white core of these papers. I'm just pulling a few pieces out. So it's a slightly bigger tear on the top part of the page than there is down the bottom. So there are my tears. Now I decided to trim the brown paper that I'm going to back these tears with. I'm going to stick them on just with double-sided tape. And I'm also going to ink all of the edges with a brown ink. I also add a couple of extra tears, so at either side of the page I'm going to create a little feature. So I just tear the paper in about 1/2 inch and then squash it down with my fingers just to make a little indent. And again, I'm going to back these with some of the flutter paper. So I decided to trim my 6x4 photo mounts, which sounds like a really good idea because then I have lots of bits to use for embellishments, only I accidentally cut one a little bit too small. So that one works perfectly well and the next one not so well. So it's okay because I take myself another sheet of paper and I just trim it and make sure it's plenty big enough and go from there. So there goes my bigger piece of paper that's going to take that top corner. And just trim down a small offcut to go on either side, and then I've got some other bits and pieces that I can use to make banners and all sorts of other embellishments towards the end of my page once I just need the little bits. So the next bit that I do is choose what papers I want to go with my photos. So I'm looking at the colours that I can see in my photos, the colours that I've got going in the paper, and I'm just choosing a few to layer up. I'm pulling in that wood grain again and some of the pinks from the flowers. I've also pulled out the peaceful kind of craft brown paper here, thinking about pulling that in too, although I decided against that in the end because I'm just happy with just the 3 sheets because I know I'm going to be adding quite a lot of paint and mixed media behind my photo mounts. I often start painty pages like this, so I will look at the papers that I want behind the photo first, get those roughly ready just so I have an idea of the size that I'm going to need to paint so that you can actually see it, because I have fallen foul to not painting big enough areas and it's always a bit more awkward to try and add more paint at that stage. So I've just lightly outlined where my photo's going and I use some of the Crackle Paint primer. Now this is a really lovely water-based paint. It gives a very soft sheen where you've applied it, and if you add thicker areas of this paint really, it creates bigger crackles, so you've got a degree of control over how big those cracks are that you want. So I've let that dry and now I have the actual white crackle paint. This is a really thick, luxurious texture. It's beautiful, and you can see where the primer is, so it's quite easy to apply it in exactly the right areas. I'm just using a palette knife to create a bumpy layer. It all adds texture to the page, and I've got a main section where my photo's going and then another little area where I'm going to have a cluster of embellishments. So another technique that I quite like is pushing my palette knife down into the paint and it creates wrinkles. So again, another textural thing that you can add to your pages. Now whilst that's been drying, I wanted to pull some fabric into my page, just again another texture. So I've got some hessian and I've trimmed it down roughly and I'm going to tuck it just behind the tears. So I'm just distressing the edges a bit. I'm pulling them about, pulling some threads out, and then I'm altering the threads so they curve. So I'm using a pokey tool to push some of the stitches up and just make it look like it's a bit of a worn old used piece of hessian. So I'm trimming the edges and lining it. I stick it on initially with tape, although I do add a bit of wet glue because tape can work to a degree because it's nice for that instant fix when you're using fabrics, but a bit of glue, especially if it's going to be hidden, works really, really well because it means that it's stuck down properly. So there I'm just going under, squirting some glue underneath and pushing it down. Sometimes you need to add a bit of weight just to hold it down and stop it lifting. So you'll see me use my glue bottle just to keep a bit of pressure. So again, looking at my photo mounts and how much area I've got, and then I'm going to go in with the Mint Glimmer Spray. Now this is a really vibrant, beautiful green, and it really pulls out the green that's in my photos, and it has a beautiful, soft, silvery shimmer. So I'm rubbing it, just spritz some on, rubbing it into the cracks. I've also added a little bit of water in there too to make it a bit more runny. And then I'm going to have two concentrated spray areas, as you can see, around my photos. I was very impressed with the stencils and also the glitter paste. Now the glitter paste is called Frost, and it's a really thick, very glittery paste, and none of the glitter falls out. And the stencils give you a beautiful, clear image. This is the fanciful stencils, and because they're slightly sticky on the back, it means you don't get any paint seepage or paste seepage underneath them, so you get a beautiful clear image. Just adding a little bit of glitter paste to either tear on either side. And here again I'm using a long strip. They're very delicate and intricate stencils, but they work so well with this paste. And then you just rinse them off under a tap, stick them back on your sheet. So whilst all of that is drying, I tend to then start to build up my photo mounts. So I'm distressing the edges. You could use scissors, you can use a nail file, you can use all sorts of tools, and I've just got an edge distresser here. So I'm just making those really rough, and again going around with my brown ink just to tie everything in on the page. You'll also see me just take them off and I stitch around the edges with some white stitching. I like to leave the threads just hanging. You can tuck them underneath if you like a neater look, but I quite like the nice messy look. And I'm also again adding a bit more hessian, and again doing my little distress technique with a pokey tool on the hessian, and I'm going to layer them under the photo just to tie everything in together. Another thing I like to do to add dimension is to pull up the edges and to bend in the corners a bit and make the papers look quite nicely worn. So I'm going to stick them together and then layer up the fabric and also layer up my photo. So there it all goes together. Here is one of the dies that BoBunny create, and this is called Elegant. It's very pretty, and I cut it out of a paper called Breeze, and then I've cut the die cut in half. So I'm adding some brown ink to it, and I'm just going to tuck that half of the die behind my hessian. So I've seen a technique where you put a little puddle of glue and rub it in your hand, so it gives you a very fine layer of glue. It does also make your hand quite sticky, so I do go back to just adding little dots of glue, but I'm adding it as another layer. It's very a bit like lace, I'll say, so it just adds another dimension, and it's very fine. It works in my Cuttlebug machine, so there were no problems using it in that. I'm also going to echo the lace look under my photo, and then I'm going to also use a little bit down in my little cluster, so you can use it in loads of ways and it goes quite a long way. So I've got some tape on the back of my photo mounts as well. I do add some glue behind them because they're quite heavy and I've got all the paint on the page. I find that a little bit of wet glue underneath that tape also helps. So I'm going through some of the Noteworthy collection and trying to work out what embellishments I'd like, whether I want tags or chipboard, what things really go with my page. And in 3D chipboard pieces, I saw a beautiful mason's jar, and the phrase on it goes perfectly with my photo. So what I've done is I've cut it out on its acetate, so I can still move it around because these are sticky, but it doesn't matter because I've cut around it, so I can work out where I want it without worrying about having to unpeel it. I also use a couple of the green buttons just to hold down the little tears that I made on either side of the page. Now some of those offcuts that I had from earlier, I'm going to make some banners with. The way that I create these sorts of banners is I make a little snip up the centre of the banner, and then I make the triangle by going in from each side. I also add a little bit of Hessian again just to echo that whole Hessian bit, and I've got another 3D chipboard piece which I'm just trying to work out whether I want it in this cluster over here or not. I end up deciding there's a bit too much green in that corner, so I do go with something else, but again it's still on the back of the paper, so I can just tuck it in and use it on a different page. And these are some of the stickers from the range. So I'm happy with my bottom cluster, so I'm going to distress all the edges again, ink them with some brown ink, and then start to layer them up. You'll also see that little bit of glitter paste down here too. So I've got almost a little bit of everything that's in the main section of my page also over in this corner. I realised that my die cut needed to go in there, so I'm just going to pull it up a little bit of glue, stick it all down and stick the end of the die cut down with a little bit more glue. Now for my 3D chipboard piece, I'm having to add some foam dots because I've got quite a few layers around my photos, so I just add some foam dots on the half that's not going to stick across my photo and those photo mounts. I'm also decided on using some of the butterflies from the Noteworthy collection. So I'm just trimming them down a little bit finer because I don't really want that white edge on my page. So I'm just trimming around the butterflies. We go nearly round the last one. There you go, I'm just bending them a little bit so they have a bit of dimension too. Now I decide to add a bit of glitter, so this is another way you can use your glitter paste. So I'm using a water brush and just a little bit of the glitter paste, and I'm going to paint it. You can't really pick it up from the camera, but I'm just painting it onto the butterfly wings, and it works really nicely because the water makes the wings more malleable, so you can kind of curve them and bend them a bit, and then they will set again, so they're a little bit more durable. I also use the word moments from the Sunlit paper. It's got all sorts of strips that you can use on it. And I know I want to use it, I haven't quite decided where, so again, distressing and inking the edges of it. I'm going to put it on some foam dots again to add some more dimension. And I end up deciding that I want it in the cluster over on the left hand side of the page. I stick my butterflies just down with a line of glue in the centre. And then there was also a little tag from the Noteworthy papers which I needed to tuck in. I hadn't quite tucked that in. It says beautiful. Also tucking underneath some of the threads. And there you go, that's my page. So here's some close-ups. You can see the crackles and that glitter paste that I've used, as well as the die cuts. I hope that you've enjoyed watching my video and that you'll check out some of the products and the BoBunny blogspot. I'll be back soon with some more projects for you to look at. Thanks very much. Bye.